Your friend just bought a house. Phoenix, Arizona. $450,000. 7% mortgage. $3,100 per month. That 7% isn't a market accident. It's Federal Reserve policy. He told you, at least I'm not throwing money away on rent anymore. But here's what he's not calculating. That same house rents for $2,200 per month. He's paying $900 more every month to own. Over 30 years, he'll pay $720,000 in interest alone. His property taxes just went up 15%. His homeowner's insurance doubled. And if he needs to move for a better job, he's trapped. This is America's favorite financial decision. And right now, millions are making it. Not because the math works, but because they're terrified of being left behind. After watching cash lose value, after seeing asset prices run away, Americans are panic buying anything that moves. Stocks, rentals, crypto, gold. The logic? I need to own something. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Buying an asset is not the same as escaping the system. And historically, this is the moment when most people make the second mistake. Not holding cash too long, but buying the wrong protection at the wrong time. Let me show you why. In the United States, asset ownership has become survival logic. Since 2020, Americans watched a sorting happen in real time. Home prices, up over 40% nationally, S&P 500, near record highs. Rents, rising faster than wages in most metro areas. And the lesson was brutal. If you don't own assets, you absorb inflation. If you do own assets, inflation works for you. That realization flipped a switch in American psychology. Suddenly, the question isn't, is this a good investment? The question is, will this keep me from falling behind? That fear creates urgency. And urgency is where traps form. Because the American middle class learned the wrong lesson from 2020. They learned, I need to own assets. What they should have learned, I need to understand which assets the system protects. That difference, between owning and understanding, is where most people lose. Here's the trap. People assume any asset is better than cash. But assets don't protect you equally. And the Federal Reserve doesn't support all assets equally. They don't respond to Fed policy the same way. They don't get the same liquidity. They don't have the same exit options. Some assets reprice fast when the Fed acts, absorb liquidity early in crises, are explicitly or implicitly protected by policy, have deep liquid markets. Other assets lag inflation for years, are easy for governments to tax, are hard to exit when you need to, have shallow markets that dry up in stress. Buying something feels like action. But positioning is about understanding where the system roots protection. And here's what most Americans miss. Retail investors buy assets after institutions have already positioned. When you hear, housing is the best inflation hedge, you need to own stocks. Gold is safety. Ask yourself, who's selling that narrative? And when did they buy? Because by the time the average American decides to buy, the institutions that created the narrative are often already positioned, or exiting. Let's talk about the most emotional asset in America, housing. Americans are taught from childhood, buy a home as soon as you can. Real estate always goes up. You're throwing money away if you rent. But let's look at what's actually happening right now. Not with slogans, with math. Phoenix, Arizona, 2024. Median home price, $450,000. Scenario 1, you buy. Down payment, $90,000, 20%. Mortgage, $360,000 at 7% interest. Monthly payment, $2,400. Principal plus interest only. Property tax, $400-month homeowner's insurance, $300-month, doubled since 2020. HOA fees, $150-month. Maintenance reserve, $200-month, conservative. Total monthly cost, $3,450. Scenario 2, you rent the same house. Rental price, $2,200 month. Difference, $1,250 per month you're not spending. But wait, I'm building equity. Let's check that. Year 1, equity build, after interest, approximately $5,000. Year 1, renter savings, $15,000. But you say, the house will appreciate. Maybe. Or maybe, the Federal Reserve raises rates further. Demand falls. Prices stagnate. Property taxes keep rising. Carrying costs increase. Insurance companies exit the market. Happening in Florida, California. Costs spike. Meanwhile, the renter has $90,000 still liquid. That down payment can move for a better job opportunity without selling costs. Isn't exposed if the local housing market corrects. Has flexibility if a personal crisis hits. I'm not saying buying is always wrong. I'm saying the equation changed after 2020, and Americans are making 2010 decisions in a 2024 system. What changed? Before 2020, mortgage rates, 3 to 4%. Down payment could be lower. Monthly carrying costs were manageable. Housing was still somewhat affordable relative to wages. After 2020, mortgage rates, 6-7% plus. Prices up 40% but rates doubled. Insurance costs exploded. Maintenance costs followed inflation. Property taxes rising to cover municipal budget gaps. Same asset class, completely different economics. But Americans still hear, real estate is the safest investment. And they panic buy at 7% mortgages because they fear being priced out forever. This is the asset trap. The narrative, you must own, stays the same. The math changes. Most people follow the narrative, not the math. Here's the part most people don't understand. Assets don't protect people. They protect balance sheets with leverage. Let me show you what that means. Corporations borrow at low rates. They get preferential credit access. Buy assets with borrowed money. Asset prices rise with inflation. They pay back loans in devalued dollars. Net result, wealth transfer from savers to borrowers. Institutions get Federal Reserve liquidity first, through primary dealers, emergency facilities, and balance sheet expansion. Buy assets during crises when retail is panicking. Hold until prices recover. They don't need to sell. Exit into retail demand at peaks. Wealthy individuals buy assets with leverage, margin, mortgages at low rates. Diversify across asset classes. Have teams managing timing and exit strategies, can hold through volatility, don't need immediate liquidity. Meanwhile, individual American buyers buy without leverage or with expensive leverage. Buy late in the cycle after price runs. Buy emotionally. I need to own something now. Must exit when life demands it. Job loss, family crisis. Absorb all downside risk personally. This is why in the United States, top 10% of Americans own roughly 90% of stocks, bottom 50% own almost none. Asset inflation widens wealth inequality. Without headlines, without votes. Automatically, the system doesn't reward ownership. It rewards positioning relative to credit access and policy timing. And retail Americans almost never have. The credit access institutions have. The liquidity institutions have. The policy foresight institutions have. The exit options institutions have. So they buy assets. At the wrong time, with the wrong structure, for the wrong reasons. And wonder why it doesn't protect them. This pattern is not new. Let me show you two examples. Britain, 1920s, 1930s. British middle class watched the pound slowly lose reserve status. Inflation crept in. Costs rose. Their response, we need to own property. They bought, but late. Prices had already adjusted for early debasement. Credit access was limited. Exit options were few. Result, property preserved wealth for those who bought early, 1900s, 1910s. Property trapped those who bought late, 1920s, 1930s. By 1950, the empire was gone, and late buyers were underwater. United States, 1970s. Inflation surged after Nixon closed the gold window. Stocks crashed 1973, 1974. Real estate became the answer. Early buyers, 1971, 1973, multiplied wealth. Late buyers, 1978, 1980, bought at peak, held through recession. Cash holders waited for safety. Lost 50% purchasing power. Same inflation, same asset class. Completely different outcomes based on when you entered. The lesson, assets didn't fail in these transitions, but buying without understanding timing and structure did. Every monetary reorganization creates winners who positioned early, uncomfortably early. Participants who bought late at safe prices that weren't safe. Observers who waited too long, stayed in cash. The asset trap sits in the middle. People who bought something but the wrong thing at the wrong time for the wrong reasons. This video isn't telling you what to buy. It's telling you what to stop assuming. The question isn't, what asset should I buy? The question is, Where does the Federal Reserve root protection, and who gets access first? Because buying an asset without understanding, liquidity cycles, when does Fed support flow? Policy incentives, what is the Fed protecting? Credit access, who can leverage cheap? Entry timing, am I early or late? Exit options, can I get out if needed? Is just another way of staying exposed. Cash is a position, assets are positions, waiting is a position, and buying blindly is also a position. The system doesn't punish inactivity. It rewards alignment. Alignment means understanding what the Fed is protecting and what it isn't, when institutions are positioning and when they're exiting, which assets get liquidity first and which are left behind. Most Americans right now are buying alignment with fear, not alignment with how the system actually functions. In every reserve currency transition, most people don't lose everything. They just lose relative position. They don't go to zero. They just fall behind the people who understood the structure. And that relative loss compounds quietly over decades. The American who bought a house at 7% in 2024 won't lose their home. They'll just carry $720,000 in interest payments, while someone who waited and positioned differently will have $720,000 in wealth instead. Same outcome for the bank. Completely different outcome for the buyer. Next video, I'll show you why the people who survive these transitions aren't the ones who predicted the crash. They're the ones who understood positioning before consensus changed. Welcome to Geopolitics of Money.